Why, hello there, everyone. It is that time of year again to vote on the Game Awards nominees because the nominees were announced earlier today, and for the most part, this is going to be a blind reaction, my blind reaction to the lists, because I have only seen the Game of the Year list and the list for Best Fighting Game of the Year nominations, and I definitely have some things to say about that. If you've seen the Best Fighting Game of the Year nominee list, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, you'll hear about it once I get to it. But this marks the third Game Awards video that I've made, at least in terms of actually voting on it, right? So even if the votes don't matter, even if it's just an illusion of agency, I still like recording these videos because it's the perfect excuse to talk about everything on this list and to summarize my thoughts on the year as a whole in terms of things that came out in the game industry, right? I am logged in with my Twitter account, and it seems to not be able to show my avatar, and seeing this, it reminded me, it was like this last year as well. I'm pretty sure, I mean, obviously I can just go back and look in the other video, but I distinctly remember that for some reason this was broken last year as well. So I don't know why that hasn't been fixed yet. Not that it matters. But anyways, let's get started. Vote now. And again, of course, as always, I can't believe I have to say this every time, but I do. Obviously, my votes are not going to be perfectly synchronized with any given viewer's votes, right? So if I vote in a way that you don't agree with, don't automatically just turn that into a dislike. Say what your votes are in the comments, right? The whole point of me making these videos is so that way we can talk about it in the comments, obviously. I think if I hit start voting, it will take me to all categories, right? I can just do it in order. So let's see. Okay, so it's kind of weird that they're not all lined up. I would prefer to have them all lined up, all 6 of them on the same row, not that it matters. So as you see here, the Game of the Year nominees are A Plague Tale Requiem, Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, Stray, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Okay, so let me start with the 3 most obvious things that would be here. So Horizon Forbidden West, I don't know if you heard that, that was my phone, ignore that. Horizon Forbidden West, Elden Ring, and God of War Ragnarok are the 3 things that were 100% assuredly going to be here, with no question, right? Because these by far were the biggest releases this year. Horizon Forbidden West came out first, and I'm sure a lot of people played it. I saw a lot of people were streaming it when it came out, right? But Elden Ring then immediately came out afterwards. Elden Ring came out either the next day or the same week, something like that. Anyways, my point is Elden Ring came out before anyone could even beat Horizon Forbidden West, right? And a lot of these streamers, and obviously I know that Twitch streamers aren't necessarily representative of gamers as a whole, you know, actual just consumers as a whole, so I don't really know if this is accurate to go by, but it's the only thing I can go by. All of these streamers who were playing Horizon Forbidden West immediately dropped it and switched to Elden Ring when Elden Ring came out. And I can't blame them because, keep in mind, the value of this critique is only going to reach a certain extent because I didn't play it myself. I only watched people playing it. But based on what I saw of Horizon Forbidden West, it looks like a mid-fest. And maybe it gets better later, but when I watched people play the game, when I watched them play the first several hours of the game, it just immediately hits you with these expo dumps of holograms talking to you, telling you these things. And that is such a non-compelling way to start a game, in my opinion, right? But obviously, there's a lot of work that went into the game. You know, from a graphical fidelity standpoint, it looks great, and the gameplay seems competent. But like the first Horizon, it's kind of a kitchen sink game, obviously. The first one was modeled after Zelda, right? It was kind of PlayStation's version of Breath of the Wild. So in a way, it's kind of like a Zelda game, but I think it's a little it's more in between Zelda and kitchen sink game, right? And by kitchen sink, I mean kind of does a little bit of everything. Some RPG elements, some exploration elements, some puzzle elements, etc., right? Because I don't know, maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if the dungeons in the game are as involved as the dungeons in Zelda. But anyways, my point is that I think Elden Ring has an immediate advantage over Horizon in this regard. And obviously, I'm talking about the likelihood of what's winning, right? Because I will obviously vote on my game of the year and say what it is by the end of this. But right now, I'm just talking about my prediction. So this is going to be a combination of my predictions, but then also what I think should be winning any given category, right? So Elden Ring, way more likely to win than Horizon Forbidden West just because of that, right? Elden Ring came out immediately after, and with any kind of FromSoft game release, obviously you had a lot of naysayers because for some reason there were a lot of people that didn't like Dark Souls, expecting for some reason that they would like Elden Ring, even though they're not a fan of Dark Souls, which makes no sense because Elden Ring is obviously just Dark Souls but open world, right? So I know that there were a lot of people who already weren't fans of FromSoft games, or just people playing Contrarian who weren't a fan of Elden Ring. But for the most part, Elden Ring was very widely praised and accepted, right? I think it sold over 16 million copies or something like that. It's probably higher than that now, or higher than whatever it was that I saw whenever I saw it. But anyways, my point is, it sold really well, and I think it's actually it might actually be the best-selling FromSoft game, at least in a while. So that puts it next to God of War Ragnarok, and I haven't played God of War Ragnarok yet. I do plan to. I haven't really watched anything about this game because I don't want to spoil anything, because when it comes to God of War, a lot of it is carried by the spectacle. Not saying that there isn't gameplay as well, right? There's obviously really good gameplay in God of War, but I think a big part of God of War is the scale of these boss fights and how epic everything feels and the build up to these fights and everything. So I didn't want anything spoiled for me. So I haven't watched anything of God of War Ragnarok yet, but I'm pretty confident it's probably at least as good as God of War 2018, which was a really good game. So I don't doubt God of War's quality, but I still think it's not going to beat Elden Ring because of, one, it just recently came out, and I don't think anybody has beaten it yet. Maybe some people who know life to the game, as soon as it came out and did like a 24-hour stream or something, did beat it. But I think for the most part, people have not beaten this game yet, right? I mean, a lot of people haven't even played it, like myself, but even the people who have played it probably haven't beaten it yet. On the other hand, though, that could be an advantage because it's fresher on people's minds, right? Because a lot of people who played Elden Ring played it at launch and haven't played it in a while, right? But God of War is much more fresh on their mind if they're currently playing it, which is kind of funny because it's the opposite for me, because I'm still currently playing through Elden Ring. I'm like 82 hours into the game. I'm over 80 hours into the game, but I still feel as if I'm not even close to the end, which is crazy. But that's a testament to how much gameplay content there is in Elden Ring. And I definitely prefer... Okay, well, I guess I'll segue this into what I'm going to vote on. You know what? Actually, before I do that, let me talk about the other things. So Elden Ring, God of War, Horizon Forbidden West are the three obvious ones. I think Elden Ring is going to win. Oh yeah, also I forgot to say the second reason why God of War has a disadvantage to Elden Ring. So one, no one's beaten it yet, right? Or virtually not many people have beaten it yet. Secondly, God of War Ragnarok is a PlayStation exclusive, whereas Elden Ring is on everything, which means more people played Elden Ring. I'm not critiquing the nature of exclusives or anything like that, because obviously it makes sense from a business standpoint, and it's good for consumers for there to be competition still amongst these companies. But in terms of this context, obviously just being on every platform is an advantage. Not that a game-winning game of the year is going to affect sales or anything. In fact, I don't think companies care about who wins what at all here. The main thing that companies are concerned about when it comes to the Game Awards is the trailers that are shown and stuff like that, right? Seeing it as an advertisement opportunity, which makes sense. The whole award ceremony thing is just for fun, I think. So that's why I think God of War Ragnarok, even though it might be just as good, if not better than Elden Ring, isn't going to beat Elden Ring. Came out way too recently, and not as many people played it as Elden Ring. And that's pretty obvious. So the weird ones, A Plague Tale Requiem, Stray, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I'll talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 first. I own Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I bought it at full price, and I do look forward to playing it. However, I haven't really gotten around to it yet because I'm not super fervently trying to play it as much as other games, because even though Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and X are two of my favorite games ever, and even though I do like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I definitely preferred the direction of Xenoblade 1 and X compared to 2, because Xenoblade Chronicles 2 took on a much more tropey anime aesthetic and feel, which was okay. It didn't bother me, but I was really hoping that it was a one-off thing for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but unfortunately, because Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was the best-selling Xenoblade Chronicles game up to that point, it seems as if they interpreted that as a reason to double down on the whole anime tropiness, right? I'm not saying it's unfortunate that Xenoblade 2 was the best-selling game. I'm saying it's unfortunate that they're doubling down on that one aspect of it, when maybe the whole reason it was the best-selling Xenoblade game is because it came out on the Switch pretty early on the Switch's lifespan, when there was still a really big install base, but there weren't many games on Switch, right? Because the Switch got a pretty large install base pretty quickly, but Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was the only big RPG that you could play on the Switch for some time when it came out. So I think that's honestly why Xenoblade Chronicles 2 did so well on the Switch. So I kind of wish they went back to the more original direction of Xenoblade 1 and X. But instead, like I said, it seems as if they really doubled down on the whole anime tropiness of it. And I'm not feeling the character designs at all in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It feels as if they just sort of homogenized all of these other characters from the other Xenoblade games, and it kind of puts me off. I'm sure I will love the game when I start playing it, which is why I'm not really submitting any critiques for it until I play it myself, but I'm just explaining why I haven't really gotten around to playing it yet. I'm sure, though, if I did play it, I would probably highly be considering voting on this for Game of the Year, right? It's pretty nice that a Xenoblade Chronicles showed up in Game of the Year nominations as well, because I know myself, along with a lot of other people, were actually worried about this game getting snubbed, but it did not. But speaking of games getting snubbed, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 might not have been snubbed, but you know what did? Sonic Frontiers. I haven't played Sonic Frontiers yet either. It came out like a day before God of War Ragnarok. I'm thinking I want to play Sonic Frontiers first and then God of War Ragnarok. But anyways, my point is, even if Sonic Frontiers isn't Game of the Year material, even if it's just a mid-Sonic game, it is still the first mainline release of a Sonic game in quite some time, right? It is a mainline entry for one of the biggest franchises in the world, Sonic the Hedgehog, and it's from a AAA studio, from the main team, from the AAA studio, with a AAA budget, etc. So Sonic Frontiers, whether it's good or bad or mid or whatever, is undeniably one of the biggest releases this year, right? In terms of both its budget and just cultural impact, at least in terms of its anticipation, right? So I think it's crazy that Stray and A Plague Tale Requiem got in over Sonic Frontiers. I think that's crazy. I have not seen the nominations yet for Best Music, so I'm hoping that Sonic Frontiers at least got nominated for Best Music, because even though I haven't played the game yet, I've been listening to the soundtrack a whole bunch, because the soundtrack is amazing. Sega's amazing when it comes to music, regardless of the quality or consistency of Sonic games. But anyways, Stray, I don't know why Stray is here, because, well, for one, I think it's an indie game, right? The only other time an indie game has been nominated up here, I think, was last year with Hades. So maybe Hades showing up here warmed them up to the idea of putting indie games on the Game of the Year nominations. So I have no idea if this game is good or not. I have not watched anything about this game outside of the advertisement campaign leading up to its release, right? Because it kept showing up in State of Plays and things like that. maybe it showed up at a Game Awards thing. It was either State of Plays or Game Awards or Summer of Gaming. One of those things, right? It kept getting advertised. And I guess it's up here just because it made sort of a cultural impact with how much people were talking about it. But I don't think people were talking about it because of it being a good game necessarily. Not saying it isn't a good game, but I think the whole reason people were talking about it so much was just because of the novelty of having a game in which you are playing as a cat, right? That was the whole novelty of it, right? It was unique. It was original. Well, I guess it's not that original of an idea to play as a cat, but actually executing that idea and making a game with it is another thing, right? So that's why people were talking about it. But since it released, I have not heard a single person talk about this game. But then again, it is video game journalist outlets who decided on these lists. So maybe the game actually was really well liked amongst journalists. But even then, I would have to assume that this is some kind of artsy, short indie game, right? Like, I doubt the game's very long. Not that the length of a game is necessarily representative of the quality, but I don't think it's not like Hades, right? Hades was definitely genre defining, or genre redefining, I should say. Sort of redefined the whole roguelike genre and had such a polish and a quality to it, and told its narrative in such an original way in a genre that was previously thought impossible to have an actual cohesive narrative, right? So it just seems weird to have Hades be the first indie game ever on a Game of the Year nominee list, and then the next year to have an indie game, but have it be a game that I haven't heard a single thing about when everyone was talking about Hades, right? So if anyone's played this game, let me know what the big deal is about in the comments, because maybe the game's amazing. And then A Plague Tale Requiem. I actually have watched some gameplay of this. I watched someone stream maybe like the first 5 or 6 hours of the game. I've seen the first 5 or 6 hours of the game, and I have to agree, the game looks amazing. It is quite a technical marvel in terms of how it looks. But as a video game, it seemed really boring, I have to be honest. The game looked really boring because it seemed to be the epitome of a movie game. It was just hold forward and you see these really good-looking scenes play out. Because the whole gimmick about the game is these rats, right? You have all these rats, and I thought the rats would be an actual gameplay element. But when I watched the game, rats would show up, but it would just be something that happened as part of the narrative, and I never really saw it as part of the gameplay. So maybe it just has a really slow start, but I didn't care to watch anymore because I was getting pretty bored, and I don't have any real incentive to play the game because, like I said, it just seems like the epitome of a movie game. And I don't mean a movie game in terms of that being the direction, like like Heavy Rain, like that's an actual movie game, or Detroit Become Human. That's obvious that it being a, quote, movie game is the actual pitch and intent of it. Whereas A Plague Tale Requiem, it seems more like a tech demo. I think that's actually a good way to put it. If I thought of phrasing it that way earlier, I would have done it earlier, and it would have saved me a lot of breath. So Plague Tale Requiem, a very, very pretty looking tech demo. So I don't know why that's up here. Probably because it's such a big budget. I'm assuming it had a high budget with how good it looks. And it was a Game Pass game, so I guess it's to give a little bit of Xbox representation up here, considering we have God of War and Horizon, which are both PlayStation exclusives, right? So those are my thoughts on the Game of the Year nomination list. And so I might have made it obvious already, but I will now talk about what I'm going to vote on, and that's Elden Ring, because Elden Ring is the only one on here I've played. Simple as that, right? I know that if I played God of War Ragnarok, I would probably have a high chance of voting on that as well. But like I said, it just came out too soon. And it's not my fault that it came out a day or two before this list, right? So I'm going to have to vote on the thing I actually have had time to play. And like I said, even though I haven't beaten Elden Ring, I've put 82 hours into it, which is a pretty significant amount of time. Definitely enough time to have an opinion on the game. I don't remember if I said this already, so I'll just say it now, again, potentially. But I'm going to have to vote on Elden Ring, not because I like it more than Dark Souls, because I actually like the Dark Souls games more. I like the typical Dark Souls formula more with the Metroidvania, more labyrinthine level design. I definitely prefer that over the open world formula that Elden Ring is doing. But even so, the sheer amount of content in this game, the sheer amount of value in this game is pretty astronomical, because it seems to be a trend of people complaining about the actual value of full-price $60 AAA games in the last few years, right? But when you play Elden Ring, that is 100% worth the $60, and it's been a long time since I've been able to say that a game is actually worth the $60, if not worth more than the $60 price tag. So just as a product, I'm going to have to vote for Elden Ring, and not just as a product, but the art in Elden Ring is pretty crazy. It's pretty something else, right? And I'm talking about the actual artistry, right? Because Horizon Forbidden West is probably, from a graphical fidelity standpoint, more impressive than Elden Ring. But even so, Horizon is pretty much just depicting the scenes in through a lens of realism, right? I mean, obviously you have the character designs and stuff, which actually took thought in creating the design from scratch. But I mean, in terms of how the environment looks, how the enemies look, right? They're pretty much just trying to depict it as realistically as possible, or at least depict whatever subject they have as realistically as possible. But in Elden Ring, not only is the subject material pretty fantastical, but the way they depict it, and the color palette, and the proportions of everything, and the vistas, and all of that, it is pretty impressive looking. Even though, like I said, I much prefer the Dark Souls games, because I'm not really a fan of open world games. Well, let me rephrase that. I am a fan of open world games, but I'm a little tired of all of these games turning into open world games, because it's definitely been a trend ever since Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild inspired so many things, and I'm kind of hoping that games start going back to being more focused, more streamlined than open world. But anyways, that's a tangent. I think I've talked enough about the Game of the Year nomination list, so let me go to the next category. And how would I do that? Okay, next category, that's how it works. I think last year, all you had to do was scroll down. I think that's why I was trying that. Game direction. Okay, is that an FMV game? I think it is. Wow, so 1, 2, 3, 4 of these are shared with the Game of the Year nominations. And even though Best Game Direction definitely is a different metric than Game of the Year, I think I'm still going to do Elden Ring, because I think in this instance, everything that's shared with the Game of the Year nominations can be voted on here for the same reasons, because God of War, Horizon, and Elden Ring all have a pretty obvious direction. I would obviously have a better opinion on God of War's direction if I played it. I would imagine that Elden Ring and God of War's direction is much stronger than Horizon, because, like I said, seeing the first several hours of that game, it was just an expo dump of holograms telling you things, and the game definitely does have a visual identity with the whole, like, tribal futurist aesthetic and all of that. But even so, just artistically and in terms of cinematography and storytelling and all of that, I would assume God of War is better. And Elden Ring, even though narratively it might not have a really strong direction, since obviously with it being a Dark Souls type game, the story is very cryptic and most of it happens off screen. This isn't necessarily just story, it's game direction in general, and the art direction of Elden Ring is so solid, I'm going to have to vote on that. Even though I think God of War could easily deserve this as well. And of course, I have no idea about Stray or Immortality, so that's that. Best narrative. Okay, I'm going to do a blind vote here and vote God of War Ragnarok. Because even though Elden Ring has a really strong direction, I just explained how Elden Ring doesn't really have much of a story at all. So it's not that the story direction is bad, it's just not very existent, right? Or it's just not told in a very traditional way. So when it comes to the games that I haven't played, A Plague, Tale Requiem, God of War, Horizon, Immortality, I have the most confidence in God of War. And I would rather do a blind vote on God of War than let something like Horizon Forbidden West or A Plague Tale Requiem win any of these awards. So I'm going to have to play favorites here. Art direction. Okay, so... Oh, wow, Scorn is here. Nice. So I played Scorn. I talked about this on stream a little bit. I played Scorn because when it came out, I heard people talking about how tough the puzzles were and how the first puzzle took them a really long time. And that immediately enticed me because I would love to play a game with really tough puzzles, right? It's been a while since I've played a good puzzle game. And obviously, the whole pitch of the game is to make all of the art direction super atmospheric and creepy and something you can really get into, right? I played Scorn, and I was pretty disappointed with it because the first puzzle that I was hearing so many people complain about in terms of its difficulty being too high, I solved that first puzzle in like 3 minutes. But then I got stuck after the puzzle, not on a puzzle, but I just literally did not know where to go. And I was stuck for like 2 hours, and I just stopped and I gave up because I wasn't really having enough fun to justify figuring it out, and I didn't want to look it up because if I were looking up answers for a puzzle game, that would kind of defeat the whole purpose. So I think the super middling mixed responses to Scorn are 100% well-deserved. Although I think that the creator of Scorn is probably pretty proud of his work because I think he created the exact thing he wanted to create, and I think he was fully expecting mixed responses. So I'm sure he's happy with the product he made, and so by proxy, I'm happy for him. And I'm glad it was nominated here, but I don't think it's actually that good. So I'm going to vote on Elden Ring again, just because, like I said, I was talking about how great the art direction is when I was voting on it for the best direction in general. So for the same reason, I'm going to vote on that for best art direction. Score and music. No Sonic Frontiers. That's an L. You know what? Just for that, I'm going to have Sonic Frontiers music playing in the background of this video. I'm going to add that in post, so if you're watching this, that means you've been listening to it already, but I'm going to do that just to give the Sonic Frontiers, just to give the Sega teams, or the Sega sound team some credit, because Sega makes the best music. I am glad that Metal Hellsinger is here, so I was fully expecting Sonic Frontiers and Metal Hellsinger to both be here, and I was going to be torn between the two. So I guess on the plus side, that makes my choice pretty easy, right? Metal Hellsinger, I've not played Metal Hellsinger yet, but I've been listening to the tracks because, well, first of all, it's kind of an unfair advantage because Metal Hellsinger is a rhythm game, right? It's a Doom-style FPS, but it also has a rhythm game gimmick to it. And so with it being a rhythm game, it's automatically going to have really good music all the time, which is the case because they actually commissioned all of these actual metal music artists to create original songs, original tracks for the game. So it's kind of an unfair advantage, but even so, even if it is an unfair advantage, it's still an advantage nonetheless. So I have to vote on that because the soundtrack in this goes pretty hard. And I bet Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has a pretty amazing soundtrack as well because all of the other Xenoblade Chronicles games have an amazing soundtrack as well. But I think I'd rather vote on Metal Hellsinger because Xenoblade has shown up here before, whereas Metal Hellsinger is a bit more of a unique case. Elden Ring's music is pretty good as well, but there's not really that much in the game. So I think it would be much more fitting for an actual rhythm game to win best score and music over a game that doesn't really have much music. It's mostly atmospheric, like dark ambient stuff, even though it's good. It's just that you can tell they didn't want much music in the game. Best audio design. I think I'm going to skip this. Because like I said, the only game on here I've played is Elden Ring. And I'm trying to think if there are any cases of the sound design sticking out to me. And this is obviously different from music, right? I'm trying to think of some examples in Elden Ring. You have the beetles, those dung beetles, which replaced the crystal lizards, and so you're supposed to be able to hear them when you get close. But sometimes it kind of confuses me because the sound effect of a Site of Grace, which replaces the bonfires, the Sites of Grace sound extremely similar to the dung beetle sometimes when you get near it. Or if I cast a healing spell on myself, it kind of sounds similar, so I think that's a little confusing. And I think a lot of the sound effects for basic things are probably recycled from Dark Souls games. They're not bad, right? They're serviceable, but I just don't know if there's anything else here that sticks out. I'm trying to think. I could always go back and vote on this if I think of something later. And audio design isn't a category I feel confident just blindly voting on things for, because audio design is something pretty nuanced and something you have to kind of experience for yourself, right? I actually wouldn't be surprised if Call of Duty's sound design is really good in terms of just being able to hear gunshots of different weapons and being able to identify like what kind of weapon someone's using just by hearing the sound or figuring out which direction they're coming from, etc. God of War might be very good as well, because I remember in God of War 2018, some of the sound effects were really just satisfying to hear, like the ice stuff, for example. So I think I'm going to skip this. Best performance. I don't recognize any of these. Well, I mean, aside from God of War, right? He won Best Performance when God of War 2018 came out, which makes me kind of want to vote on someone else just because he won one already. Is that Atreus? I'm thinking it might be Atreus because Atreus sounds older. I don't know if they recast Atreus to get an older sounding voice or if they literally just got the same voice actor. I'm thinking it's probably more likely they got someone new. Immortality, that's the FMV game, right? That actually might be really good. I think I'm going to skip this then just because of a lack of information. Games for Impact. I don't think I played any of these. I'm going to skip that one. Oh, you know another game I'm hoping shows up? Triangle Strategy. That came out this year, right? I hope that shows up somewhere. Best Ongoing. I'm going to have to vote on FF14. I'm just going to have to keep on voting on FF14 as a way to keep it in good shape for when I finally retire from fighting games and retire into FF14 as the FGC retirement home that it is. Best indie game. Haven't played any of these. People kept on recommending me Neon White because they kept saying that it was a game that I would really get into. And I agree that on paper, it does sound like a game I would be all over. But whenever I watched the gameplay, it didn't look very fun to me. Because even though I would be down for a first-person platformer, the shooting elements seemed really unsatisfying. Like the actual audio visual feedback from the shooting seemed like nothing. And likewise, the platforming, it didn't look very satisfying. So I don't doubt that the actual literal gameplay of the game is fun, but when I watched it, it just looked as if it were lacking something, which is really weird because again, on paper, it seemed like something I would be all over because when this game came out, it was actually at the tail end of me doing that speedrun contest or participating in that speedrun contest for Demon Turf, which is a platformer, an indie platformer, like a really fast-paced indie platformer that's level-based. In this case, it was Demon Turf Neon Splash. It was kind of a spin-off game with just speedrun levels. And by the end of that speedrun contest, each level is only a few seconds. Each level is only like 10 to 20 to 30 seconds at most. And so when I watched speedruns of Neon White, it definitely seemed to kind of target the same audience. in terms of having these levels that end up being just a few seconds once you start optimizing them. So I think I eventually will check it out, but like I said, just watching it, it felt as if it were lacking something. I am tempted to vote on it anyway, though, just so that way a platformer could win something, because platformers barely get any kind of recognition at the Game Awards ever, outside of like Crash and stuff, but I'm talking about the actual awards. And also the music's amazing because it's all breakcore from Machine Girl. And so kind of torn between Neon White or Sifu, even though I haven't played Sifu either. I was a lot more pumped to play Sifu when it was first revealed because it seemed more like a God Hand type beat 'em up, but then as the coverage progressed, it seemed to be a bit more like a generic third-person action game. I might be wrong about that, but I think something else came out that I was playing when it came out, and so I just got sidetracked with other games. But I think I'm going to vote on Neon White just to vote on a platformer, just to rep the platformers and, you know, colorful games with breakcore music, because I would love to see more of that. Best mobile game, is Marvel Snap here? Yeah, it is. So I've actually only been playing Marvel Snap since like 3 days ago. I just recently got into Marvel Snap, but I'm actually enjoying it quite a bit. I got into it because it's on Steam, right? If it were just on phone, I probably wouldn't have tried it. But I got it on Steam, but I have been playing it on both Steam and on the phone since there is cross progression. And so I'm more incentivized to play it on the phone if I know that the progress is going to go towards Steam for when I want to stream it. I streamed this once, and I had a lot of fun streaming it, and I had a good turnout. So I'm thinking I'm actually going to make this a regular game I stream. So that's an easy vote. I forgot Diablo Immortal came out. I didn't even know there was an Apex Legends mobile. I'm really curious how that game looks and runs. Community support. Going to have to say FF14 yet again. Innovation and accessibility. I'm going to have to skip this one because not having played any of these, I don't necessarily know how these games are in terms of their accessibility features. So I'm just going to have to hope that the people who do vote on that are doing so knowledgeably. What is this? Best VR AR? I think we all know what's going to win here, so I'm just going to leave that be. Best action game. Okay. Historically speaking, Game Awards always has a terrible list of best action games because I don't think they understand what an action game is. It's always such a random grab bag of things on here. So, Bayonetta 3, yes, that's an action game. Call of Duty, no, that's not an action game. That's a first-person shooter. Neon White, no, that's not an action game. That is a platformer. Sifu is a beat-em-up, but I guess you could say a beat-em-up is an action game. TMNT, that is also a beat-em-up, which I guess you could say is an action game. So this list sucks. And despite that, I'm going to vote on TMNT because I want to rep TMNT and actual traditional beat-em-ups like this. Sifu's a beat-em-up, but TMNT is much more of a traditional beat-em-up. And the sprite work and the pixel art and the overall presentation in this is amazing. All of these new sprites that they made for a game like this, it obviously took some work, and I would love to see more games looking like this, right? So I'm going to have to vote on that. This list sucks, though. Holy cow. Best action adventure. Wow, Tunic got on here. Nice. Tunic is, if you couldn't tell from the image, also a Zelda clone of sorts, similar to Horizon, but obviously this is much more on the nose, and it's more of a top-down view, so it's more like A Link to the Past. I haven't played it, but I watched one of my mutual streamers play it, and he looked like he was having a lot of fun with it. I'm going to do a blind vote here and just assume God of War has the best action/adventure elements, because I think of all these games here, God of War and Horizon are probably the most of an actual action-adventure game. A Plague Tale Requiem was way too narrative-focused with not enough actual gameplay mechanics, in my opinion, to be an action-adventure game. Stray looked more like an artsy game than actual action adventure, even though I could be wrong because I haven't seen anything of it since it released. Tunic. I think Tunic is a straight up Zelda clone. I guess an actual legit Zelda formula is action adventure. But it's a bit more puzzly than something like God of War, right? I think God of War is a much more representative balance of what an action adventure game is, or what you would typically expect from it. Best role playing. Ooh, Live Alive came here. Live Alive and Triangle Strategy. Ooh, okay, so I bought Live Alive, but I haven't played it yet, whereas I have played Triangle Strategy, and I have not beaten it yet because I am being extremely masochistic and imposing a certain challenge on myself in playing through the game, because even though the game revives any kind of fallen team members when you have someone die, like if you're playing the game and you have one of your characters die, they will come back at the end of it. But I don't like doing that because I'm used to playing turn-based tactics games in which there is permadeath. And so anytime a character dies, I restart the whole mission until I can do the mission perfectly without anyone dying. It's more fun that way for me because I like feeling satisfied at the end, knowing that I enacted the perfect strategy to get everyone through it without dying. That's just how I have fun playing it. Even though it's taking me forever, maybe some people think, maybe some people would think that playing it that way is less fun. I have more fun playing it that way. And to boot, I've been playing it on the hardest difficulty, and it eventually got to a point at which it feels almost impossible to get through it with my current challenge. But I think it is possible, right? Almost impossible. Keyword almost. I pretty much just have to trial and error the F out of the missions now until I can figure out the exact perfect strategy, and I just have to keep on trying it over and over until I eventually get lucky with the RNG. So if I want to stay committed to doing it that way, that's what I'm going to have to do. I was streaming it until eventually, once I got to this point, I realized if I'm going to keep on streaming this game and if I'm going to beat the game on stream, it's going to take so many hours and my entire stream is going to be dominated by this one game, and I didn't necessarily want my whole stream to be dominated by just that game. So since then, I took it off the stream and I haven't played it yet because deep down, I want to bring it back to the stream. I don't want to play it off stream if I'm going to bring it back to the stream, because if I'm bringing it back, I'd rather just have all of my gameplay be streamed. But on the other hand, I'm probably not going to bring it back because of how much time it takes up. So it's kind of in a weird limbo for me right now. But anyways, my point is I love this game. Pixel art, amazing. Like the whole presentation of the HD 2D aesthetic, it's amazing. The characters are great. All of the story stuff, I thought it was all really interesting. Obviously, it's very political, and it's more about the politics and the world and the economics of this place, which I'm sure some people will find boring, but I'm really into that kind of stuff. So I actually found the story stuff and the narrative stuff and all the dialogue and all that really engaging. And Live Alive has the same exact aesthetic as Triangle Strategy, but it's actually a remake of an old game. And so just because I haven't played this game yet, coupled with the fact that it's a remake, whereas Triangle Strategy is an entirely new game, I'm going to put my vote on Triangle Strategy. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is here as well. I'm assuming that Xenoblade 3 or Elden Ring is going to win this category just because of them being inherently way more popular than Live Alive or Triangle Strategy, which is a shame because Elden Ring is probably going to win Game of the Year anyway. I have to vote on Triangle Strategy, and also just shout out that game in this video. Best fighting game. Oh boy, we're here. Okay, so we have DNF Duel and King of Fighters 15. Those both make perfect sense, right? These are both fighting games. Okay. And then we have JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Multiverses, which are okay. Well, JoJo's is it's a port. It's sort of a remake, but it's mostly an HD port of a PS3 game. And I don't think ports should be included for things that came out this year. So that's just me. I don't think ports should be included. Also, you can couple that with the fact that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R, even though it is technically a fighting game, it's much more of a fan servicey game rather than it being a fighting game first and foremost. And this isn't me coming up with this. The devs before have literally stated that they created that game with the philosophy of making it a fan service game first and foremost rather than it being a fighting game per se. So this probably is barely justified being on here. And then Multiverses is not an actual fighting game because it's like Smash Bros, but you kind of have to include it because a lot of people consider Smash Bros to be a fighting game, and Multiverses is such a big deal because aside from Smash Bros, Multiverses is the fighting game with the most different IPs crossing over ever, right? Which is a big deal. Plus, Multiverses started a lot of conversations about free-to-play fighting games. So Multiverses actually made a pretty big impact on the industry, quite a bit. So I think just because of that, Multiverses is barely justified here. So DNF Duel, King of Fighters 15, 100% those are traditional fighting games, right? JoJo's and Multiverses, debatably justified being on here. But then Sifu, what? So first of all, Sifu doesn't have any kind of multiplayer at all. So it has no PvP, which means it's not a fighting game in any stretch of the meaning, right? It's a beat 'em up, but it's not even like a traditional beat 'em up in which you can do motion inputs for combos and stuff like that. So that tells me whoever was making this list of nominees, it tells me that their definition of a fighting game is just any game in which you're fighting, right? Because I guess they saw that the main character does martial arts. It made them automatically think it's a fighting game. But by that same logic, by that same philosophy, you could say God of War Ragnarok is a fighting game because Kratos fights the enemies in that game. So what's the fundamental difference between God of War and Sifu? Is it purely just because Sifu does martial arts? I don't even know what the main character's name is. Mr. Sifu, just because Mr. Sifu, main character, does martial arts, that turns his game into a fighting game? I don't think so. Obviously, the definition of genres is completely arbitrary, and it does come down to semantics, yes. But the whole point of genres is so that way you can say something, and then people will automatically know what you're talking about, right? And even though the definitions are arbitrary, the definition of what a fighting game is has had many years to develop, and it has become pretty well defined, at least in terms of it having to at least be a multiplayer game, right? Obviously, there are some disagreements in some areas. Like, for example, I already talked about it. Some people consider platform fighters like Smash Bros to be a fighting game. Other people don't consider Smash Bros to be a fighting game. That's debatable. But at the very least, everyone would have to agree that it needs to at least be multiplayer. So I don't know why Sifu is here. I don't know what they're thinking. It gives me some insight onto what these people are thinking when it comes to these different genres, and it just makes me think they're insane, right? Because their action game list is always crazy, and this is maybe even weirder. So it would be so stupid if Sifu won this. I don't think there's a real risk of that because I don't think Sifu is necessarily popular enough to just win the popularity contest. Me, personally, King of Fighters 15 is one of my favorite fighting games ever, and it is by far my favorite fighting game that came out this year. My top 3 favorite fighting games that have come out in the past 5 years would have to be Soul Calibur 6, Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, and King of Fighters 15. KOF 15 is pretty great. It has everything you would want in it as someone who likes fighting games, aside from the fact that the matchmaking is still messed up. And it seems as if they're really dragging their feet on fixing the matchmaking in this game. However, I think the reason why it's taking so long is because they're just going to lump that in with the crossplay update that they are planning on adding, because the game is eventually going to get a crossplay update. They've announced that already before. At least I think they have. And so knowing how similar the matchmaking is in terms of the matchmaking likely being tied to the netcode and all of that. They're probably working on both of those things at the same time and are going to release them as an update simultaneously. But obviously, the fact still remains that the matchmaking being messed up is still a downside to the game. Not that it really messes up my enjoyment of the game, since I always just make lobbies when I stream the game. But still, that is a negative. So anybody critiquing the game for that fact, it is a justified critique. Even though me personally, I love the design, the actual gameplay design of the fighting game, and the roster is huge and all of the characters are so fun to play. So that is my vote. However, my prediction is that Multiverses is going to win purely because it was free to play and so many people played the game. I think everyone and their grandmother played the game, at least for the first couple of weeks when it was out. And I would have to say, if Multiverses wins, that actually is pretty well deserved because, like I said, it made quite an impact in the industry in terms of getting all of these other developers and content creators talking about the possibility of fighting games going free to play in the future as the norm. So I'm voting on KOF 15, even though I'm expecting Multiverses to win. And if Multiverses wins, I think that would make a lot of sense, but I have to vote KOF 15. So long as Sifu doesn't win this category, because that would be stupid. Best family game. I actually have some good things that came out this year here. So is Mario and Rabbids even multiplayer? I think I'm going to avoid voting on that because I don't even think it's multiplayer, right? Lego Star Wars at least has 2-player, right? All of the Lego games I've played have had 2-player, but I don't think there's anything more than that. Kirby, does Kirby have 2-player? I don't know. I would love for Nintendo Switch Sports to be good enough to vote on, but Nintendo is kind of doing the same thing with this game as they've been doing with their last several Mario Sports games. It's as if they released the game specifically missing game modes and content, so that way they can add it later as an update when the game should have launched with it in the first place. So unfortunately, I have to avoid voting on that. And then Splatoon 3 is here. Obviously, that's a multiplayer game, but it's only online multiplayer, right? I don't know if there's any kind of couch co-op or split screen. When I hear best family game, I don't hear best multiplayer game. I think of like a couch co-op, sit down together and play game. And the only game here that I know is Lego Star Wars. And I have really good memories with the Lego games, and I actually had a lot of fun watching clips people made of this game because the game just came out of nowhere, at least to me, because I didn't see it advertised anywhere, and then all of a sudden, my Twitter feed was full of these DMC-type combos. I don't know why, but they just went all in with the combo ability in this game, and I bet if I played that with someone else, we would be having a lot of fun doing all these crazy combos in a Lego game, so I actually kind of hope that wins for that reason. Best sim strategy. Okay, why in the world would Triangle Strategy not be nominated for best strategy? It literally has strategy in the name. That is absurd. I don't even know what Victoria 3 is. I did not know Doom Spice Wars came out. Wow. Going to have to vote for Total War Warhammer 3. A lot of you might not know this, but I actually am a pretty big Warhammer fan. I read more of the Warhammer 40k stuff, but in terms of Warhammer Fantasy, I actually played a lot of Total War Warhammer 2 with my brother, and since Warhammer 3 has come out, I've been playing that with my brother and one of his friends as well. So I guess in terms of the audience on this channel, you guys might be surprised to see me vote on this, but that's actually a pretty easy vote from me. Definitely one of the, if not the most definitive strategy games on the market right now. It was Total War Warhammer 2, and that was the newest one, and now that 3 got its update, so that way it has the main campaign, because Warhammer 3 kind of had this weird early access release in which it came out without the main game mode, and I just waited to play it until the main game mode got added, but it did get added this year. So now that that is added, Total War Warhammer 3 is now pretty much the definitive RTS game in my book. What category is this? Best sports racing? Wow, we did not get much for that this year. I'm going to skip that category. I'm going to let the sports games players sort that one out. Best multiplayer, here we are. This makes a lot more sense. Wow, okay, this is another snub. Where is Gundam Evolution? Where is it? Someone's souls are chained down by gravity. Sitcom laugh. So that's quite a shame. So Gundam Evolution not showing up here makes me think it's not going to show up anywhere here. So I guess the West is just once again allergic to anything mecha or Gundam related. Because I would have loved to vote on that here, but I guess in a way, this could just be copium, but I kind of enjoy the fact that it's a bit more secretive and underground than something as mainstream as Overwatch. It kind of feels like the cool kids club when you're playing Gundam Evo. So in that case, even though I love TMNT Shredder's Revenge, I'm thinking I'll vote Multiverses in terms of multiplayer. If we were just saying which game is better, I would say TMNT, but just talking purely about the multiplayer aspect, Multiverses is literally a multiplayer game and pretty much nothing but a multiplayer game, whereas TMNT is, you can play it single player. You know what I mean? You can play it single player and it's still a good game, whereas Multiverses is purely a multiplayer game. So I think that's why I would vote on this, because a smaller percentage of this game is the multiplayer, if that makes sense. Content Creator of the Year. Do I know any of these? Rebellion, doesn't he just post deals on Twitter? That's it, right? Does he do other things? It's just his profile picture of Mob from Mob Psycho. If it actually showed a real human face, it would gaslight me into thinking that he does videos and stuff, but apparently not. So I know about Ludwig, even though I've never watched him. So I'm going to vote on the one person I have seen, the one person whose presence I have seen and interacted with on the internet. Best debut indie. I saw so many people streaming Vampire Survivors when it came out, but whenever I watched it, I did not get it. Kind of tempted to vote Tunic, but once again, I think I'm going to vote Neon White just to rep platformers. I think platformers need repping a bit more than Zelda clones, considering how many games have been modeled after Breath of the Wild since that release. Adaptation. Ooh. Wow, Arcane was this year? No way. That's a tough choice between Cyberpunk and Arcane. Logically, I'm going to have to say Arcane, because in terms of a writing standpoint and in terms of the actual artistry and making something original looking, Arcane is better than Cyberpunk, but my full bias is kicking in because I'm a huge Studio Trigger fan. But logically, it would have to be Arcane. And it sucks it has to go against Sonic the Hedgehog 2, right? But I think I'm going to have to vote on Arcane instead, because I don't think Hollywood movies really need the extra exposure, right? Cuphead Show, I did watch that as well. I think it got a new season. I didn't watch the newest season. I watched all of the episodes that were available when the first batch got added. And I talked about it on stream before. I thought that the quality was pretty inconsistent because some of the episodes, none of the jokes landed for me. But then some of the other episodes I thought were legitimately funny. So the humor in it was really hit or miss with me. And the whole thing was kind of riding on its humor. So even though I think Cuphead Show was decent, I don't think it's nearly as good as Cyberpunk or Arcane or Sonic the Hedgehog 2. So I'm going to vote Arcane. I'm actually really curious which one's going to win here, because before Cyberpunk Edge Runners came out, I would expect Arcane to win here. But I was seeing Cyberpunk stuff all over the place on Twitter when it came out, even though Twitter's a cesspool and doesn't really even have that many people on it. it increased the sales of the game, and then the game ended up selling like over 20 million copies or something, which is crazy considering how the game had a notorious reputation for being a broken mess, and it was still somehow able to sell over 20 million copies. So Cyberpunk could potentially beat Arcane, but then again, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 could beat Cyberpunk and Arcane because it's a movie that aired in the theaters that maybe even more people saw. I know it's probably likely that more people saw Sonic than Cyberpunk or Arcane, but in terms of the people voting on this stuff, they've probably seen all three. So I think whoever wins this one will be hard to predict, but like I said, I'm voting Arcane here, even though these three are all very good. Most anticipated game. Well, that's a remake of a game I've played already. Starfield. I think we can all know what to expect with Starfield. Hogwarts, don't care about Harry Potter, so it's going to come down to Breath of the Wild 2 or Final Fantasy 16. Personally, right now, my most anticipated game is Street Fighter 6, but obviously that's not here. So I'm going to say FF16 because I think with Tears of the Kingdom, it's a bit easier to know what to expect. And also, Breath of the Wild has influenced so many things already. I'm thinking I would rather rep whatever is opposing it, even though I'm looking forward to both of these games quite a bit. I think I'll start getting more hyped for Tears of the Kingdom as we start getting closer to the release. But everything about FF16's direction so far, I have been really interested in, even though I do wish that Final Fantasy would go back to its traditional turn-based combat. I think it's a shame that Square Enix is kind of trying to get rid of turn-based combat in the mainline Final Fantasy games. Makes no sense. I thought that the mainline FF games would stay turn-based and non-turn-based stuff would be for spin-offs, or maybe every now and then a mainline FF game would be different, because when FF15 came out and it had like Kingdom Hearts combat, I thought that was going to be the unique aspect about 15. I wasn't expecting them to make the next game real-time combat as well. But even despite that, I'm sure it'll be a game that I really like, because they poached a combat designer from Capcom, so you can definitely bet that they are going to take full advantage of that by making the game real-time combat. And with that combat designer, it's probably going to be even better than the combat in FF15, because the real-time combat in FF15 was it was okay, but there was definitely some room to be improved upon. Wow, this has been going for over an hour already. How long were my other Game Awards videos? I don't think they went this long. I don't know why it's so much longer this time. Best esport game, have to vote League of Legends as usual. Next, esports athlete. Do we have, that's a Valorant, CSGO, League of Legends. Oh, Faker. Yeah, I'm going to have to vote Faker. I mean, this is the only other League of Legends guy, but Faker is the only person here I know. Best esports team. I will just vote on whatever the League of Legends team is. Haven't really kept up with League of Legends esports in a while. Esports coach. No League of Legends. Skip. Esports event. Have to say Evo, right? Especially since this was the first in-person Evo in the past couple of years. And it looks as if we are already at the end. That was category 31 of 31. Let me go back and make sure these things saved. Yeah, okay, so they saved. Okay, so those were my votes, obviously. Let me know in the comments what your votes looked like. Let me know if I overlooked something, or if there was some other game that got snubbed other than Sonic Frontiers, for example, because I would not be surprised if they forgot something else, right? So let me know in the comments not only what you voted on, but what the lists would have looked like if you got to decide the lists. And also share in the comments what your predictions are of what is going to win in each category, because I am curious to hear. So with all that said, thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you all later. So bye for now.